Thanksgiving, a day meant for family, gratitude, and love. But that night, I learned just how cruel my own blood could be. I came to my son's house carrying a pie and a heart full of hope. The table was filled laughter, wine, and the smell of roasted turkey. But when I walked in, everything went quiet. My daughter-in-law looked me up and down, then sneered. "Is greater than old man? There's no room for you." She dropped a plastic plate on the floor. "Is greater than eat like a dog." My son laughed. The room fell silent. And as I looked at them, my own flesh and blood, I swallowed my pain, straightened my back, and said 4 words that changed everything. Before we continue, please comment where you are watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travels, and don't forget to subscribe for more. The sky was gray when Harold Thompson stepped off the Old City bus, holding a small foil-wrapped pie in both hands. His breath came out in clouds, the November air biting his cheeks. The pie was pumpkin, his late wife's recipe, the one that always made the house smell like cinnamon and comfort. He stood in front of a wide, 2-story home that looked too perfect to touch. White pillars, tall glass windows, trimmed hedges, everything about it said new money. Harold smiled softly. His son Ethan had done well, maybe too well. He straightened his old coat and rang the bell. For a moment, he imagined the door flying open, Ethan grinning like he used to, shouting, "Dad's here!" Maybe Clara would smile and pull him inside, and little Benji would run into his arms. That's what Thanksgiving was about: family, forgiveness, and love. The door opened, and reality stepped out. Clara stood there, wearing a fitted cream dress and a sharp expression. Her eyes darted to the pie in Harold's hands, then to his worn-out shoes. "Oh," she said flatly, "you came." Harold's smile faltered, but stayed. "Of course. It's Thanksgiving, isn't it?" She stepped aside, but didn't really make room. "Well, come in, I guess. We're busy in the kitchen." He entered quietly, careful not to scuff the spotless white floor. The house smelled of roasted turkey, buttered rolls, and perfume. Laughter floated in from the dining room, but none of it was familiar. Strangers' voices, not family. "Should I take my coat off somewhere?" Harold asked gently. Clara didn't look up from her phone. "Just hang it anywhere." He nodded and found a small corner near the stairs. He hung his coat and held the pie close, his fingers trembling a little. The walls were filled with pictures: Ethan in a suit, Clara at charity events, Benji in neatly framed school portraits, but not one photo of Harold, not one of the woman who raised Ethan. When Ethan finally appeared, he looked different. Expensive watch, slick hair, the tired eyes of someone always trying to impress. "Dad," he said, forcing a smile. "You made it." Harold's heart lifted at the sound of his voice. "I wouldn't miss it for the world." Ethan clapped him on the shoulder. "Just once. We've got a few friends over tonight. Hope you don't mind, kind of a mix of work people and neighbors." "Not at all," Harold said, though he wished he could say otherwise. They walked toward the dining room. The table sparkled under a chandelier, crystal glasses, silver cutlery, linen napkins folded like swans. Every seat was taken. Everyone dressed like they were attending a gala instead of a family dinner. Benji spotted Harold first. "Grandpa!" the boy shouted, leaping from his chair. Harold's face brightened instantly. "Hey, champ!" He bent down, hugging the boy tightly. Benji smelled like apple shampoo and innocence. But Clara's voice cut through the warmth. "Benji, don't run around while we're serving, please." The boy nodded and slipped back to his seat. Harold stood quietly, unsure where to go. "Can I put this on the table?" he asked, holding up the pie. Clara gave a quick, polite laugh. "Oh, that's sweet. We already have dessert covered, but maybe later." She turned away before he could reply. He looked down at the pie. It suddenly felt heavier than it was. As dinner began, Harold found no place set for him. He stood near the doorway, watching others eat, laugh, and talk like he wasn't there. Ethan glanced at him once, but quickly looked away when Clara whispered something in his ear. Harold sat quietly on a small wooden stool in the corner of the room, holding his hat in his lap. He tried to smile when someone looked his way, but no one really did. For a long while, he said nothing. He only listened to the clinking forks, the laughter, and the sound of his own heart breaking, softly and silently, beneath it all. The laughter around the table grew louder, but Harold felt like he was standing outside a window, looking in on someone else's family. Every now and then, someone would glance his way and then quickly turn back to their food. No one offered a seat. No one asked if he'd eaten. He tried to stay cheerful. "They're just busy," he told himself. "It's Thanksgiving. Everyone's distracted." He cleared his throat softly. "Ethan," he said, "do you need help serving the turkey?" Ethan looked up from his phone, startled. "Oh, no, Dad, we're good." Clara, standing beside him, smiled faintly. "Don't worry, Harold. You just relax." Her words were polite, but her tone made it clear she didn't mean them kindly. Harold nodded, his smile fading just a little. He looked for an empty chair but found none. Every seat was taken, even the one at the far end, the place where a host might have seated an elder. A woman he didn't know, one of Clara's friends, was sitting there, laughing loudly at something Ethan had said. He stood awkwardly by the wall, his hands folded. After a while, he noticed Benji glancing his way. The boy's plate was piled high with mashed potatoes and turkey, but his little eyes were filled with worry. "Grandpa," he whispered, waving him over. "You can sit next to me." Harold smiled warmly and took a small step forward, but Clara turned sharply. "Benji, sweetie, let's not crowd the table. Grandpa's fine where he is." The boy's smile faded, and Harold stopped mid-step. "It's all right, Clara," he said softly. "He's just being kind." Clara didn't answer. She went back to serving wine. Harold returned to his corner, pretending not to notice the discomfort in the air. He could feel eyes on him now. A few guests, whispering. One woman looking at him with quiet pity. He hated pity more than cruelty. He tried to make himself useful. When a napkin fell to the floor, he bent down to pick it up. When someone asked for more gravy, he quietly carried the bowl from the kitchen. No one thanked him, but he smiled anyway. Ethan, between conversations, glanced at his father once or twice. There was guilt in his eyes, maybe, but pride quickly pushed it away. He laughed louder than before, trying to look like the perfect host. Harold looked at his son and saw the boy he used to carry on his shoulders, the boy who once called him hero. He remembered those nights fixing broken toys, those mornings walking him to school with packed lunches his wife made. He wondered how time could twist love into silence so easily. Dinner stretched on. Plates clattered, drinks poured, jokes flew. Harold stood quietly through it all, invisible among the sparkle and noise. At one point, Clara's mother leaned over and whispered something to her. They both looked toward Harold, then chuckled. He didn't hear the words, but he saw the smirk. He lowered his head and pretended to check his watch. Hours passed like that, slow and heavy. When the laughter began to fade and dessert was served, Harold tried once more to join. "Would anyone like some pumpkin pie?" he asked, lifting the foil slightly. Clara looked up, surprised. "Oh, that again?" she said with a laugh. "We really don't need it, Harold. We have cheesecake and pecan tart already." He nodded, forcing a smile. "Of course, maybe next time." He placed the pie gently on the counter, as if it were something fragile. In the corner, Benji's eyes filled with quiet sadness. He wanted to hug his grandfather but didn't dare move. Harold turned toward the window, watching the night settle outside. The lights of other homes glowed warmly in the distance. Families gathered together, laughter spilling out into the cold. He whispered softly to himself, "Your mother would have loved this night." But the words got lost in the noise, and no one at that table heard him. The night had grown colder outside, but inside, laughter still bounced off the walls. The table was full, plates scraped clean, wine glasses half empty. Everyone looked satisfied, everyone except Harold, who still stood quietly near the window, holding nothing but his hat. He hadn't eaten a bite. When Clara noticed, she called out in a light, joking voice that carried through the room. "Oh, I almost forgot Harold hasn't had dinner yet." Heads turned. Conversations stopped. Harold smiled awkwardly. "That's all right. I can fix myself something later." But Clara was already moving toward the kitchen. No, I'll get you something. We wouldn't want anyone thinking we starved you." The room chuckled. Harold stood frozen. He didn't want to cause a scene. He wanted to believe she was being kind. Clara came back holding a paper napkin and a plastic plate, the thin, bendable kind meant for picnics or children. She set it on the corner of the rug near the wall and said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, "Here you go, old man. You can eat here." The sound of laughter flickered through the room again, quiet but sharp. Harold blinked, unsure if he'd heard her right. "On the floor?" he asked softly. Clara's tone was playful, but her words cut deep. "It's cleaner there than the couch, don't you think?" Ethan's mouth twitched. For a moment, guilt crossed his face. But then one of his guests laughed, and he followed, forcing out a chuckle. "Come on, Dad. You used to eat on the floor all the time when I was a kid. You don't mind, right?" Harold looked at his son, the man he had raised, the boy who once held his hand and asked him to build toy cars from scrap wood. Now, that same boy was laughing at him. The room went silent again. Everyone waited to see what the old man would do. He didn't shout. He didn't cry. He only nodded slowly and said, "Sure, son. I don't mind." He took the plastic plate and knelt on the floor beside the wall. Clara handed him a few scraps of turkey, a spoonful of mashed potatoes, and a slice of bread that had already cooled. "Here you go," she said, wiping her hands on a towel. Harold thanked her quietly. His voice trembled as he spoke. He picked up the fork, another plastic one, and began to eat, slowly, carefully, as if trying to protect what was left of his pride. The room felt smaller, the air heavier. Every bite was like swallowing shame. Benji watched in silence from his seat. His small hands clenched around his fork. He looked at his father, then at his mother, then at his grandfather kneeling on the floor like a stranger. "Mom," Benji said softly, "why can't Grandpa sit at the table?" Clara laughed nervously. "It's just a joke, honey." But Benji didn't laugh. "It's not funny," he whispered. Harold looked up at him and smiled, the same gentle smile he always wore when trying to protect someone else from pain. "It's all right, Benji. I'm fine, my boy." The boy's eyes filled with tears. He pushed his plate toward the edge of the table. "You can have mine, Grandpa." Clara's smile faded. "Benji, stop it." Ethan said nothing. His jaw tightened, eyes locked on the plate in front of him. Harold put a hand on his grandson's arm and whispered, "Keep your food, son. You're growing." The boy shook his head. "But you're hungry." A lump rose in Harold's throat. He couldn't speak. He only nodded, took another bite, and lowered his gaze to the floor. The chatter started again around the table, awkward and forced. Some guests pretended not to notice. Others stared down at their plates, ashamed. Clara clapped her hands once, breaking the silence. "All right, everyone, dessert time. Who's ready for cheesecake?" The room brightened again with laughter. But in that corner, the old man ate in silence, a plastic plate on the floor, his pride slipping away with every bite. And though no one knew it yet, the moment had changed something deep inside him, something that would never be the same again. The room was alive with conversation again, but Harold hardly noticed. He picked at the cold turkey on the plastic plate, each bite heavy, each chew a reminder of years spent giving to a family that now seemed to barely remember him. The laughter around the table sounded distant, like it belonged to another house, another life. Benji kept glancing toward him, worry written all over his small face. The boy's fork hovered, untouched, as if he couldn't decide whether to eat or to run to his grandfather and protect him. Finally, he slid his small plate toward Harold, whispering, "Grandpa, you can have mine." Harold felt the warmth of the gesture, but it also made the cold sting in his chest sharper. He gently pushed the plate back. "No, my boy. You keep it. Eat. and grow strong. Clara shot Benji a sharp look, but he didn't flinch. The innocence and courage in his eyes reminded Harold of the boy Ethan once was, long before ambition and pride had replaced love. Harold set his fork down and looked around. His eyes met Ethan's, the same son who had once clung to him, the boy who called him a hero. The same son who now laughed at him in front of friends, who let his wife humiliate him with a plastic plate on the floor. A memory hit him like a punch. Years ago, Ethan's mother, his late wife, had served him dinner after a long day of work. She had never allowed him to eat on the floor. She had always reminded Ethan that respect begins at home. Those moments had defined the family, shaped the love Harold tried to carry forward. And in that moment, Harold spoke, softly, but with a power that made the room freeze. "Just like your mother." The words were simple, only 4 of them, but they carried the weight of every Thanksgiving he had ever celebrated, every lesson he had taught, every act of love he had given, and never asked to be repaid for. The laughter stopped instantly. Conversations hung in the air, unfinished, awkward. Clara froze, a faint color draining from her cheeks. Ethan's face went pale, his jaw tightening. He had heard those words before, spoken with pride, spoken with love, spoken when someone dared to cross the line his mother had once drawn. Benji's small hands rested on Harold's knees. "Grandpa?" he whispered. Harold gave a small, sad smile and patted him. "It's all right, son. You've got nothing to worry about." But the room felt different now. The air shifted. Even the guests, who had only known polite manners and casual fun, sensed the weight of the words. The memory of a woman long gone, a mother who had shaped the family, was alive in that single phrase. Clara's hand trembled slightly as she reached for a napkin. Ethan looked down at his hands, unable to speak. Harold slowly got up from the floor, leaving the plastic plate behind. His dignity, though battered, was intact. He walked to the window, staring at the cold night outside, the same night he had arrived, hoping to be welcomed with warmth and laughter. And as he looked out, he felt something stirring inside, a quiet strength that had lain dormant for too long. That 4-word sentence had changed everything, though no one in the room realized it fully yet. Harold breathed deeply, steadying himself, ready for whatever would come next. The past had spoken, and the present had to listen. Harold stepped away from the table, the plastic plate left behind like a small, bitter reminder of everything that had happened. He walked toward the door slowly, each step heavy, but his back straighter than it had been in years. The house that had once been full of warmth now felt cold, hollow, like a stage set where the actors had forgotten their lines. Benji rose quietly from his chair, tiptoeing toward him. "Grandpa, wait," he whispered, his small hand reaching for Harold's sleeve. Harold bent down and held him close. "I'll be all right, my boy," he said softly. "You stay strong." Ethan finally found his voice, but it came out shaky, almost unrecognizable. "Dad, I..." Harold shook his head gently, his eyes filled with both love and sorrow. "Not now, son." Clara looked stunned, her face pale. She had expected Harold to plead or beg, maybe even apologize for the tension. But instead, he had risen quietly, calmly, like a man who had already decided what he deserved. The guests murmured among themselves. Some whispered apologies, others shifted uncomfortably. The laughter that had filled the room hours ago had vanished, leaving only a heavy silence. Harold stepped out into the cold night, the crisp November air biting at his cheeks. He drew in a deep breath, feeling the chill awaken something within him. Clarity, strength, and the realization that he would not be humiliated again. Behind him, the door creaked slightly. Ethan's voice called out, shaky and uncertain, "Dad, wait." Harold paused but didn't turn. His heart ached, yes, but the hurt was now tempered by a quiet resolve. Respect is earned, not demanded, he thought. Love is shown, not mocked. He walked down the path toward the street, the lights of the neighborhood glowing faintly in the distance. Memories of the past, of his late wife and the family they once were flooded him. He realized that the true strength of a family is not in the house they live in, the clothes they wear, or the parties they host. It is in the heart, the respect, and the care we show one another. Meanwhile, inside the house, Clara and Ethan stared at the empty corner where Harold had knelt. The weight of his words, "just like your mother," pressed heavily on them. Ethan's mind replayed every moment he had laughed, every word he had allowed to wound his father. For the first time in years, he felt small and ashamed. Benji tugged at his father's sleeve. "Dad! Grandpa!" Ethan knelt beside his son, his eyes filling with something long buried. "We were wrong," he whispered, almost to himself. "We were very wrong." Outside, Harold paused at the curb and looked back once, his silhouette framed by the warm glow of the house. He didn't say a word. He only nodded to himself, a quiet promise that he would no longer let anyone diminish him. The night was silent, except for the distant hum of cars and the whisper of the wind through the trees. But in that silence, something had changed. Harold had reclaimed his dignity, and inside, Ethan, Clara, and Benji had glimpsed, however briefly, the strength and love they had almost forgotten. It was a Thanksgiving unlike any other one that would never be forgotten, because it had reminded them all of what truly mattered. I left their house that night with nothing but a plastic plate on the floor in front of me, a symbol of the laughter and humiliation they thought could break me. But as I stepped into the cold night, I realized something important. My dignity, my love, and my heart could never be taken away. Years of sacrifices, of raising a son, of teaching kindness and respect had built something stronger than their cruelty. I walked home quietly, feeling lighter than I had in years, knowing that true strength is measured not by others, but by the love we carry inside. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe for more.